The Forgotten Inmates. Women at Rikers. Rikers Island. Known worldwide as one of the most violent jails in America. But hidden beyond the headlines of gangs, escapes, and chaos, lies a story few ever tell. The women who serve their time here, and are often forgotten. They make up less than 10% of Rikers' population, yet their experiences are some of the darkest. Abuse, neglect, violence, and silence. For decades, women locked inside Rikers have endured conditions that rarely reach the public eye. The first women's units at Rikers opened in the mid-20th century, meant to separate female inmates from men. But separation didn't mean protection. In fact, it meant isolation and invisibility. Overlay with inmate testimony. They said we were safer here, but we weren't safe from the guards. We weren't safe from each other. And we definitely weren't safe from being forgotten. Inside, women faced overcrowded dorms, cold cells, and a lack of medical care. Pregnant women reported being shackled. Mothers were separated from children. And complaints, often ignored. In 2016, the death of 27-year-old Khalif Browder brought international outrage over Rikers. But few remember another tragedy. Women who died inside, quietly, without protests, without headlines. Most women at Rikers aren't there for violent crimes. Many are mothers, trapped in cycles of poverty, abuse, and addiction. Yet the system treats them no differently than the men, sometimes worse. As the world debates closing Rikers, the stories of these women risk vanishing into silence. This is their story.
Survival behind the walls. Survival at Rikers isn't about doing your time. It's about making it through the day. For women inside, survival meant keeping your head low and your back against the wall. In dorms built for 40, more than 60 women were often crammed together. Arguments turned into brawls. For some, fighting was the only way to prove you wouldn't be prey. But danger didn't always come from other inmates. Over the years, dozens of officers at Rikers faced accusations of sexual abuse against women in custody. Few were ever convicted. Many victims stayed silent, fearing retaliation. Medical neglect was rampant. Women complained of untreated illnesses, infections, and miscarriages inside. In 2008, a federal lawsuit revealed that pregnant women were sometimes shackled during labor, a practice condemned worldwide as torture. A code of silence ruled the women's units. Reporting abuse could mean punishment, isolation, or worse. So many chose silence. It was survival, but it came at the cost of justice. One case that exposed Rikers' hidden abuses was Tanya Miller's. Convicted of a low-level drug offense, she alleged repeated assaults by correction officers. Her case dragged through courts for years, but like many before her, justice was delayed and denied. For mothers-to-be, the cruelty was even sharper. Stories surfaced of women giving birth while handcuffed to hospital beds. Others were forced back into cells just days after delivery, their babies placed in foster care. But even in the harshest conditions, survival was an act of resistance. These women weren't just inmates. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, clinging to humanity in a place designed to strip it away.
For many women, their only way to be heard was through letters. Letters to mothers, children, lawyers, or activists on the outside. Pages smuggled out of Rikers painted a portrait the public rarely saw. Denise. Testimony. They called me inmate, but never my name. I had 2 kids. I begged to see them. Months went by. Nothing. I felt like I didn't exist. Narration. Denise spent nearly a year at Rikers on a probation violation. Her children were placed in foster care. She never got them back. Teenagers, some as young as 16, were once housed in the women's units at Rikers. Vulnerable, scared, and often victims of abuse long before they ever entered jail. Instead of protection, they were thrown into the same cycle of violence. In the middle of chaos, women created their own moments of peace. Prayer circles, makeshift therapy groups, even poetry nights. Small acts that helped them hold on to their identity and sanity. Some voices did break through. Writers and activists like Victoria Law published letters from women at Rikers, exposing the abuse and neglect. But for every voice heard, hundreds were silenced. The toll of Rikers wasn't just measured in years served. It was in children lost, families destroyed, mental health shattered. Many women carried scars from Rikers long after release. These weren't just inmates. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, each with a story, each with a voice. And together, they reveal the human cost of a system built on neglect, the fight for change. For decades, their stories were ignored. But slowly, voices on the outside began to rise. Family members, activists, and survivors demanding justice for women lost inside Rikers. Class action lawsuits began to expose what the public rarely saw: systemic abuse, medical neglect, and sexual assaults inside the women's jail. In 2008, a federal case forced the city to confront decades of abuse, but legal victories were slow, and change came slower. Investigations by watchdog groups, the Department of Justice, and journalists painted a grim picture. Rikers wasn't just broken, it was dangerous by design. Women, already vulnerable, paid the highest price. By 2015, Rikers was under national scrutiny. Federal monitors stepped in, and city leaders promised reform. But activists insisted reforms weren't enough. They called for the unthinkable: to close Rikers altogether. The families of women who died at Rikers became powerful voices. They turned their grief into action, telling the world that their daughters, sisters, and mothers deserved dignity. Women led the movement. Former inmates spoke out, risking stigma to share their stories. Grassroots organizations, many led by women of color, demanded justice for those who couldn't speak. The pressure grew. For the first time, the hidden suffering of women at Rikers was no longer invisible. The city was forced to respond, not with words, but with plans. The fight for change was no longer just about reforms. It became a battle to erase Rikers from New York's future. But for the women who lived through it, the scars would remain long after the gates finally close. The road ahead. In 2017, New York City announced its boldest promise yet: Rikers Island would close within the next decade. For many, it was a moment of hope. But for women who had already lived and suffered inside, it was a reminder of what came too late. The plan: replace Rikers with smaller borough-based jails. The women's facility would shut down, and inmates would be moved closer to their families and communities. But critics warned, changing the buildings didn't mean changing the system. Former inmate: they can close Rikers, but if they don't change how they treat us, it won't matter. Abuse can happen anywhere. For many, closure was just a symbol. Real change would require accountability, culture shifts, and protection for women long denied dignity. Even after release, the trauma of Rikers lingers. Nightmares, families fractured, stigma that never fades. For thousands of women, Rikers was more than a place. It was a wound. Activists argue that closing Rikers is just the beginning. The real fight is to end the cycles of poverty, abuse, and addiction that send women into the system in the first place. The women of Rikers are no longer just statistics. Their stories of pain, resilience, and survival are now part of New York's history, a history the city can't afford to forget. Final words. They were the forgotten inmates, but their voices will not be silenced.